Hello, I'm Mark, and welcome to the second part of my Unreal Engine tutorial on how to build a simple networked physics movement component for your Unreal Engine games. So in this video, we'll be recreating this spectacular flying cube as seen here, using our network component that we created in the last video. As you can see, we can yaw left and yaw right over the network. We can give it a little bit thrust forward and a little bit thrust backwards. And we can also thrust it left, and we can thrust it right. And then we also added the ability to do a quick little impulse, so we can fire off the impulse, and you can see it takes right off. And without gravity to pull us back down, we're just going to keep going up and up and up. Alright, so as always, we've got a little bit of ground to cover today, so I'm just going to go ahead and stop this before we crash into the sky sphere. And let's go ahead and let's build out this cube. So I'm just going to move this off onto my other screen real quick. And I'm going to bring up... So let's do a quick little recap of what we did in part one. So in part one, first off, we went ahead and created our object simulation component, which we'll be using today. And that was derived off our physics movement component, which we built in the last video series. And then we also created these this object simulation input and object simulation state, and these structures are going to be the structures that are going to be passed up and down the network so that we can move physics bodies on the network. All right, and also within this class we went and overrid the initialized network physics movement, and as well as the overriding the simulation physics tick, so we can get access to those threads from this derived class. And then also, since we are sending information on these two objects here, we went and created some methods to fill these inputs into the input state so that we could then use that. And then over here on the second file, we went ahead and defined that simulation input object. So again, X, Y, Z in the boost count. And then we also have the simulation state, which is, again, the travel direction and the jump count. And then finally, we created our network physics data. And so this is the actual data packet, which will be sending the state object down the network. And then we created another one for our inputs, which will be how it sends the input data down there. And that will all be sent through the object physics movement traits object down here. And that's how we kind of wire that up into the network physics components that Unreal Engine provides for us. All right, so that should be it for the Visual Studio. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. So everything else should be all in the editor. So first off, let's go ahead and get that mapping done. So I'm just going to open up the IMC Flying Cube that we did in the last series, and we're just going to reuse this by just adding the jump in. So I'm going to just click on mappings, and I'm just going to reuse this IA jump, which was created for us when it created the third person project. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on our little keyboard here, and I'm going to assign that to the Y key on my Microsoft wireless Microsoft controller that I have set up. So when I hit the Y key, that will allow us to boost up. And I'm just going to go ahead and save all that. And then next, let's go ahead and create our flying cube. So to do that, I'm going to come into the content drawer, I'm going to go to blueprints, and I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate the blueprint from the last series. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit duplicate. So that has the setup for us. And I'm just going to rename it to Flying Cube Network so that we know this is the networked version. And let's open it up. So in here, what we're going to do, let's go ahead and gut out everything that we don't need. So we don't need the tick, because that's going to be handled from within our new components. We don't need these variables, and we don't need these functions. So we're really going to strip this thing down. Of all of the logic that we added, since that's now going to be handled within the new component we created. So I'm going to delete that, I'm going to delete that, delete the input and the travel direction, and then we're just going to replace the physics movement component with the object simulation component that we created. And there it is. So I'm just going to compile, save. All right, after that, let's just drag this off. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag out and find that set throttle X function. And I'm going to map the input action to that. And let's just zoom in a little bit, see what we're doing. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the throttle Y. So again, drag this off. Set throttle Y. And again, hook this up. And then we're going to do the same thing for the yaw input. Just going to grab this, drag this over. Set yaw input. Connect that dot to there. Connect that to there. And then we have our jump. So IA underscore jump. And that is going to go to our impulse boost over here. And there it is. And we don't need to hook this up because whenever we call this, we were just going to go ahead and increment. So let's go ahead and just clean that up. And I'll just go ahead and bring all of this close together so we can keep it nice and tight. All right, so we're just, so as far as the setup, the same cube, it's a physics, simulate physics, turning into a physics body. I'm going to turn gravity off. Make sure that's turned off. We don't need to change anything there. Spring arm, shouldn't have to change, we're not changing anything there. Same with the camera. We don't need anything there. So the only other thing we need to do here is on the object itself, so we're going to come over to the replication and we need to turn on always relative. And under physics replication mode, we're going to set this to predictive interpolation. And I'm going to hit save and save. All right, once that's done, okay, so once that's done, that should be everything that we need to make sure that this can be replicated over the network. So now we just need to come up to the project settings and turn on the predictive movement, physics movement. So we're going to come to edit, project settings. That's going to open up the project settings. I'm going to come down to physics down here. Just going to open up the engine physics, and under here, as you can see, I already had this turned on, so we'll just do this again. So here it's just going to be enable physics prediction, turn that on, enable physics history, turn that on. We want to turn on sub-stepping. We're going to turn on sub-stepping async, and we're going to turn on tick physics async. So once we've turned all of that on, we should be able to close the settings so that it takes. I'm just going to hit save again. All right, so now that we've got this set up, let's go ahead and set up the solution so that we can spawn in our object over the network. So to do that, I'm just going to come to the content drawer and I'm going to come up to content. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a custom game mode. So when this project was created, Unreal Engine and Visual Studio went and created this physics movement game mode for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a blueprint off that, and then we'll just override to the blueprint. So I'm going to go to Content. In Content, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to go to Blueprints, and let's go find that physics movement live game mode. So there it is. I'm just going to click on that, hit select, and I'm going to change this to my game mode. All right, so with that with that created, I'm just going to pop this open real quick, and we are going to change the default pawn class from BP third person character to the flying cube network. So I'm going to hit that, hit save, make sure everything there is saved. And I'm just going to move this off screen real quick. And so within the map itself, and this is our physics mode live, I've gone ahead and added a second starting point for characters. So we actually have two of these because what we want is the game to spawn them in. And so we have game client 1, and then this should be spawned in for client 2. And I'm going to make sure that this object, which was done in a previous, is set to disabled. So we shouldn't be taking control of that. And then finally, let's go up to the open world. And in the open world settings, I'm going to come down to game mode, and I'm going to set this to use that blueprint. And then that's going to set the default to the flying cube network. Alright, so let's just make sure everything's set. So this is number of players. So this is going to be in standalone mode on one client. Let's just go and do a quick test to make sure our cube is wired up and can move in standalone mode. So I'm just going to fire it up. There it is. And I've started it out. And so yeah, in standalone mode it is still working the way we want it to. Left, right, and this one has the impulse, and there's the quick little impulse up. Alright, so let's see if we can get this to work over on the network. So we need to set up the proxy to do that. So I'm going to come back up to these three little ellipses. I'm going to then come and change this to 2, and I'm going to set the net mode from standalone to play as client. And let's see if we can get this working. So I'm going to hit the play button and see if it fires. Okay, so we have that set up. We've got our 2 cubes here. Over here's the client. This is kind of like the client and server. This is more the server view through a different client. So I'm going to click on client 2, and let's see if we can get this thing to move. And there it is, moving on the client. And as you can see, we can take a look at the server, and our cube is rotating and moving and going left and going right and impulsing and doing a little hop up. Alright, so that looks like it's all working. So let's go take a look at that impulse a little bit more. So I'm just going to come back to the flying cube. Going to come into the blueprint, and I'm going to go back to the cube, and I'm just going to turn gravity on, so the cubes should just fall straight to the floor. Let's go ahead and move this off again real quick, and we'll fire this up. And sometimes it gets a little temperamental when trying to spawn in. Sometimes I just have to goose it a little bit. So it's going to work with me. Apparently it's not working with me right now. So let's just stop. Let's move it up a little bit. So what's happening is it's spawning in the second cube, but it's spawning it into the floor. So it's actually not spawning it at all. So let's see if we can get it from a different angle. No, you're not going to work. You're working with me, are you? Alright, well, we've seen it working. I'm just going to take this back down to standalone. Apparently the proxy's not going to be working with me with gravity turned on, so I'm just going to turn this back on. So as you can see, here's our cube again. We're in standalone. And to kind of show off the impulse, so with gravity turned on, you can kind of move it. We can kind of use the impulse to try and keep us in the air. We can turn. We can still go left and right. But as you can see, there's different forces now in play, so it's not quite as easy. But as you can see, what goes up will now come down and crash horribly into the ground onto the side. All right. So I think that's going to do it for this video. It's a real quick one. I just wanted to make sure that we could set up the network and show you what it looks, show you how to set up it for the network and the proxy. And that will do it for this video. So again, if you like what I'm doing, feel free to like and share my videos, as well as subscribe to my channel. And I will see you again in the next video. Cheers. Bye.